gift was a bit of a surprise for book readers, wasn't it? We were very fooled. It didn't turn out to apply to what we thought it would. It had nothing to do with the area south of the Night's Watch, referred to as the Gift and the New Gift. And it certainly had nothing to do with Arya, which was the biggest surprise of all. We were expecting it to have something to do with the Mercy plot line, at least to do with Arya in some way. The Gift of Mercy is a term we've all heard many times, and we certainly apply that to Arya, perhaps first among all other possibilities, and there are other options, as we said. So it looks like Mara Trent gets to live on for now. Welcome again to another episode of History of Westeros podcast, the podcast dedicated to George R. R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire book series, as well as HBO's Game of Thrones. And nowhere do we combine the two more than in our book-to-show reviews. Welcome back, Radio Westeros, folks. Lady Gwyn and Yolkboy, it's good to have you both back. And I know scheduling is sometimes difficult, and we got to get these episodes out quickly to respond to the TV show and the TV show viewers. So I'm glad we could have both of you here today.
Really glad to be on again.
Yeah, I'm glad to be back, Aziz.
Great, great. Well, unfortunately, we don't have a Shay today. She is still watching the show and will respond to comments and such. She doesn't hate the show, nothing like that, but she is a little burned out on talking about it, and I don't blame her. There's a lot to talk about. We can't all be as glowingly positive as I sometimes am. I'm almost on the board. I think I haven't been called a show apologist, but I might be getting close to that at this point. But I do criticize plenty of things. I think that's only fair. There is plenty to praise and plenty to criticize. We'll do that as we always do. And Ashea will be in our The Winds of Winter spoiler chapter analysis, which is already out by the time you're seeing this, so take a look out for that if you're interested in seeing where a certain young Stark daughter is outside of her much tougher show environment. There were also fewer parallels in this episode than in previous episodes, at least as far as we could tell. We certainly looked and did our usual amount of digging, and there were plenty of sneaky hints and some nods rather than direct parallels, and we'll point out those. And this is something we should expect as the show continues to move forward. As we've all known this for a long time, the show is diverging. The more it goes on, the more it diverges. And some people hate to hear this, but I fear to say that we haven't seen the largest divergences yet. The biggest are yet to come. So as we go forward, there will be fewer connections to make, but there'll always be some. There'll always be important things, and there'll always be things to look for and talk about, even if it's less to connect the books to show as it used to be. So, quick overview for what to expect in this episode. We're going to discuss all the locations as always, but there's going to be some differences because we've got some additional news. So after we talk about the Wall and the North and Meereen and King's Landing and go through our watch and our questions, of which we have an extra-sized array this time, we're going to do our worries of the week as well. We're going to talk about who's in danger for their lives, as well as maybe who is less in danger for their lives. We're also going to talk about the trailer for the next episode, for episode 8, but the biggest new feature we're going to have is we're going to discuss some casting news. Thanks to Watchers on the Wall, we got some big news on casting for Season 6, so because some people don't want to know that because it implies spoilers, we're going to have that at the very end, after the trailer discussion. And, of course, the trailer discussion will be after the credits. So if you don't want to get spoiled on the trailers or the Season 6 casting news, simply listen to the credits and drop off after that. From a high-level view, of course, this episode was called The Gift. As we said, it was a surprise as to what the gifts were, but there were several things one could consider a gift, I suppose. Tyrion, of course, named himself a gift, so that's an obvious one. Lancel was kind of a gift in a sense, for assuming that's who Littlefinger was talking about when he was offering a handsome young man to Olenna. If it's not Lancel, which is a distinct possibility, we'll be talking about that later in the episode. Of course, we also had the antidote gifted to Bronn. He also got an eyeful, I suppose. That's a gift in a sense. Reek kind of gave a dark gift to his master by revealing Sansa's candle plot. I bet some people didn't consider that a gift, but I guess in a sense it was. And Ramsay kind of gifted Sansa the woman in another even darker sense of the word gifting. He gave her a flayed woman. But Cersei's arrest at the end of the episode is a bit of a gift to viewers who have been wanting her to get justice for a long time. And in another sense, she sort of gifted herself to the High Sparrow the way she opened herself up to these things. We tend to talk about themes in our show-only episode, so we won't be repetitive and talk about that here, but I will at least list what we thought of as themes in that regard. Captivity, helplessness, being trapped by choices, sexuality, and winter. Now, Lady Gwyn and Yolkboy, did you guys have any other themes that you caught for this episode, or does that pretty much capture it?
Yeah, that does. Yeah, I think that does for me.
All right, then, let's get started. We have a lot to cover, so let's head on to the wall. We'll start with Jon and Tormund and Alliser and Ollie. We kind of get the hint that everyone hates Jon's plan. Not really a hint, more of a reminder that pretty much nobody is on his side except the possibility of Tormund and some of the wildlings. And Jon says, "As always, I thank you for your honesty," when Sir Alliser tells him what a horrible idea this is, and it's kind of a rigid exchange there. Lady Gwyn, what did you think about Alliser being left behind at the wall? That's a bit different, isn't it?
Yeah, I thought that was a little curious. You know, in the books, Jon sends him on a ranging, and he is the first ranger. So it just made me wonder, especially given the dialogue that he has with Jon, if he's being set up to play the Bowen role in the stabbing, because obviously Bowen doesn't seem to have much of a role in the show, even though he's there as a character.
Yeah, he exists, but it would be, unless he's one of the participants, it would be odd for him to be the solo or the leader of that effort.
Right.
Now, we also have Sam and Gilly and Aemon, and again, Alliser casts his shadow over this scene. We looked for, of course, Aemon's death was very sad. We looked for some comparisons to his death scene in the books. Those parallels are mostly on the surface. There's the mention of Egg, and Lady Gwyn, you had some thoughts on this scene as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think we more or less called this in a previous discussion that it was going to happen with Sam and Gilly after Jon left. But I was a little disappointed that there wasn't more to this scene in terms of Aemon's memories and the history that he sort of rambled about as he was sort of delirious. Those things are slanted to the prince that was promised, so it's probably understandable. But at least I dreamed I was old.
Yeah, I almost am glad it wasn't two more. Like I also wanted more, but it was so sad I was misting up a bit, so it was kind of it was also a bit of relief. Like, okay, well, at least we don't have to get really sad. I was happy either way, I guess, or sad either way, depending on how you put it.
Right.
Now, our good buddy Brendan Beefish, a.k.a. Jeff Hartline of the Wars and Politics of Song of Ice and Fire blog, wanted us to discuss whether the mention of Egg here is a possible hint at HBO doing the Dunk and Egg novellas. Well, that's a good question, and it's also just a good point to raise regardless of whether it reflects on that possibility at all. Because I imagine some of you are not aware that HBO actually optioned the rights to Dunk and Egg. Optioning is not something to get terribly excited about. It's a very common process in Hollywood where HBO or another studio wants to hold on to the rights. They don't want anyone else to get a hand of it, so they pay kind of a small amount to be able to keep the rights and to keep from anyone else from being able to do it. So HBO has the rights to it, but that doesn't mean they're going to do anything with it. I'd say it's more likely they do something like Robert's Rebellion or a different kind of prequel that involves characters more directly related to the show. But Dunk and Egg is certainly up there as a possibility. And so I wouldn't say it makes it more likely, or that it's a hint, rather. But I would think but it definitely gives me optimism, and it makes me hopeful. And I do think it's possible. I think the overall success of Game of Thrones on HBO is massive, and they're definitely going to want to do more in this world when A Song of Ice and Fire is basically concluded, at least their version of A Song of Ice and Fire is concluded. So I wouldn't be surprised if they actually end up doing both in the long run. You know, if they do Robert's Rebellion and that does really well, they're going to want more material. Why not do Dunk and Egg also? So I could definitely see that happen. Do you guys have any thoughts on the possibility of Dunk and Egg being developed, or is it more just a fingers crossed kind of thing?
Kind of.
Well,
you go.
okay. If it does happen, I hope it is with HBO. I know that HBO have kind of own a lot of the terminology of the A Song of Ice and Fire world. So if someone else did Dunk and Egg, they wouldn't be able to use words like Targaryen. I've read that. So he's hoping that if it does go somewhere, it goes to HBO, and I think they're probably the only kind of company who could kind of pull it off with the effects and stuff that you might need, or the sets and costumes and the good actors that we have come to appreciate.
That's a good point. At least they wouldn't need to do dragons or direwolves.
Right.
It would be nice to see some of those battles, or at least just the tournament, the trial by 7. That would be very cool.
Yeah, I think they could do a great job with it. And I'm sure that they have, as they look at that option, which is bound to expire one day, they're running focus groups to see if maybe that little mention of egg and all the sort of excitement among the fandom sends them, a message.
We can hope so. Definitely hope so. Now, before Aemon passed, he told Gilly to go south with the baby, which is just making us more and more excited for Old Town. The possibility seems to be more realistic and less about optimism. And without being too spoilery, I hope this doesn't spoil anybody, when we discuss the casting choices, the casting calls at the end of this episode, I'll say our reasons for optimism are even more founded. So I won't say anything more than that. But Knight of the Forums, Darren Tucker, really wondered about this farewell between Jon and Sam, because it seemed almost final. He wonders if this is the last they'll see each other along the lines of a possible trip for Sam to Old Town. If Sam does leave, it could be before Jon gets back, especially if Jon gets stabbed beyond the wall rather than at Castle Black, which is certainly a possibility. Mary H. wonders if this does happen, could Sam take on some of Marwyn's role? That's a very interesting question. Of course, that's very hard to answer because, well, what is Marwyn's role at this point? We don't really know. He's one of the ones that Quaithe warned Dany about in one of those visions. But he seems to be someone that would be an ally of Dany. Do you guys have thoughts on Marwyn? This is a decent spot to spend a minute or two on Marwyn in general.
Well, I wonder if they're going to have glass candles, because that's one thing that he did. I think in the books the glass candles will be very important, and could facilitate Sam actually becoming a wizard. It did early on.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's take a closer look at Sam's eulogy, which does have some similarities to the book. Yolkboy, why don't you take us through that?
Yeah, I looked at the eulogy side by side, and the book eulogy is a bit longer, but in essence, they did it quite accurately. It's just a little bit shorter. They cut a few things off, but it's very accurate, I'd say. And well, actually, there's, aside from that being similar, there's large differences with Aemon's death in the books and in the show. Of course, Sam, Gilly, and Aemon are on board the ship, the Cinnamon Wind, in the books, and they're obviously traveling. And Sam does actually plan to have Aemon burned, but instead he preserves his body in rum until such a time that it could be burned. I've got the quote here. "He will still burn," Sam thought miserably. Only now I have to do it. The Targaryens always gave their fallen to the flames. Kahuro Mo won't allow a funeral pyre aboard the Cinnamon Wind, so Aemon's corpse had been stuffed inside a cask of black belly rum to preserve it until the ship reached Old Town. And as far as I'm aware, that is the last time that Aemon's body is commented on. So we actually don't know what happened, but Sam was planning to burn it in the Targaryen rite.
I guess there's some tinfoil possibilities for Aemon's body still being around. But I tell you what, I love a good glass of black belly rum soaked in old Targaryen.
Targaryen infused rum.
Yeah, I mean that is
It's
fire.
like the worm
right
in
there.
tequila.
Right.
Yeah, it's a worm. It's still a worm. It's just WYRM.
Right. Nerd worm.
Yeah, it's the nerd worm, right? So let's talk about Sam, Gilly, and Ghost. This I thought was the weakest scene of the episode, and I really wonder how the hell is this kid still a baby?
Yeah.
Common and Marcella have aged up quite a bit, and this kid's been around about as long as they have. Hasn't this kid been around since like season 2? I think so.
Yep, I think it was season 2.
So this kid they're really driving the point home about ice preserving or something.
Right. Yeah, this is one thing that a lot of people are commenting on. Doesn't make a lot of sense that this baby hasn't grown.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the weakest aspects of the show is the way they just do not give much thought to time and distance very much at all. The way Littlefinger travels around and the way some of these characters age it definitely is a big piece that's missing from the books that keeps things feeling realistic. George takes a lot of pains to make things feel right, to make them feel consistent. And even though George occasionally makes mistakes on timelines, it's not exactly his strong point either. He still puts a lot of effort into it and hides it where he can. So he doesn't make it obvious when he's not putting the most attention into it. So even when he makes mistakes they're really subtle. This is not very subtle, having this baby stay a baby for a couple of years.
No, it's not. And just point out that in the books, when they get, it's obviously not Gilly's baby, it's Mance's son, but when they get him to Old Town, they're ready to name him. And, they say that they don't name them till they're 2, so obviously that child has aged, at least in the books, to some degree. Yeah. More than the one in the show.
I wouldn't say there's much to say about the actual action scene. I liked seeing Ghost for a minute, even though maybe it was a little awkward that he would be there. It seems odd that Ghost wasn't with Jon. But the more I thought about that, it made sense. Jon, you could argue it as Jon left Ghost behind on purpose because he knew Sam would be in danger. And there's also some hints that Jon will be on a boat, which makes bringing Ghost a little more awkward. So I could swallow that. It's not so bad. The rest of the scene was just kind of, I don't know, it was a little bit of a waste.
Yeah.
We've certainly seen the whole Night's Watchman, trying to rape people before. That's just, it's realistic. It's just a bit played out. But it does at least give more reason for Sam and Gilly to get the hell out of there, which has been, as we said, is being pushed as an idea quite a bit more. So I'm not sure we needed more reason for them to leave, but this makes it quite clear that staying there is not the best idea for them.
Right.
Now, here's a good thing to draw a parallel to is the wildling attitudes on rape. Now, Gilly wasn't terribly fazed by this incident, which is a bit refreshing to not have to watch someone be really anguished about it. And that harkens to Ygritte's speech to Jon in the books about why the wildlings are the way they are about choosing a husband or a wife or whatever. It's about proving that you're strong enough, that if you can steal a woman from her family, well, you're clearly strong and clever. And it's a very savage custom, but it's also in a sense, it's a bit more like how animals in nature work, which is why we call it savage. But we can't say that it's wrong. It's just wrong for our society. Their society is what it is, and that's how it works. So after that scene, we have Sam losing his virginity with making his funny noises there. So Yolkboy, take us through some of the parallels there with the same scene in the books. Yeah.
Yeah, or everyone remembers this moment in the books. It is the fat pink mast moment, which is used to describe Sam's erect penis. It is very memorable, a nice and romantic scene with Gilly for his first time. And one thing I noticed in the books, there's more emphasis on, oh, I'm going to break my vows. And
Yeah.
that was, as far as I remember, that wasn't brought up, was it?
Not really.
No.
He had already
Sam
kind
wasn't contemplating.
he had already kind of talked about it back earlier in the season. Remember, he's saying to John, well, technically it says you must not father. It doesn't say anything about actual intercourse. So I guess that was set up ahead of time.
Well, yeah, in the books, I guess you don't have his internal monologue. I think it is internal. He thinks about his vows. And Gilly, I think about the same time, says that she's his wife. And I think he has one more thought about his vows, but he just says yes to Gilly. He just kind of abandons that. So, and then it goes on to say that he was, quote, drunk on rum and mother's milk and Gilly. Anyone who's read that scene recently knows what I mean.
And she kind of sells it well to him. She's like, look, the old gods aren't watching out here. You said your vows to the old gods, and we're out on a ship at sea. There's no way they can see you. And it's not like he needed a lot of convincing, I think.
No.
What do you think a cock merchant would pay for a fat pink mast? Is that worth more or less than a dwarf cock?
Depends. Do they sell, or what are their ways of valuation? Is it weight? Is it rarity?
I think you could sell that one as a charm to a sailor. The fat pink mast. I think it would be worth quite a lot.
So, Lady Gwyn, you had another thought on what happens with regards to the traditions around this funeral and how it played out on the ship a little differently.
Yeah, it was, on the ship it was just after Aemon's funeral, of course, without the nasty scene in the middle. They were basically following the Summer Islanders' tradition of making love in the face of death, and this is something that they've been encouraged, and is it Kojamo?
Yeah.
The woman, she takes the baby for Gilly, so that Gilly can have a night off. This tradition is explained to them, so it was maybe even more kind of special in the books than here.
I know that name well because one of our cats is named Koja.
There you go.
Easy to remember.
Yes.
Okay, any more thoughts on Sam and Gilly and the wall and the wildling situation? All right, that's a no, I guess. Let's move on to a bit south, but still in the north. Let's talk about Winterfell. Let's talk Reek, Sansa, and Brienne. I thought it was fitting, though they fooled us pretty well, that Reek was not so easily, quote unquote, swayed against Ramsay. After all that he went through, it seemed like it would have been a little much for him to just turn it around so quickly. Mm-hmm. What did you think? What did you think, Lady, when you had some observations about Brienne and the?
Mm-hmm. Well, I can say I agree with you about the Theon thing. I think it wouldn't have made sense for Theon to move right out of being Reek into that sort of heroic path. He definitely needs a little more development. Hopefully there's a step along that path. That said, that's a big departure from the books because Reek never actually betrayed Jane. He just didn't do anything.
Right.
So he didn't actively go to Ramsay with any betrayal. So.
That's a good point, because if he's swayed by helping Jane in the book, so he doesn't really have a lot of guilt over, it's not his fault at all. Versus Sansa, he really did do bad things to her family, even though he didn't actually kill her brothers.
Right.
So that's a good point.
Yeah.
That he has more reason to feel guilty here.
Yeah, now he's just added to his guilt.
Yeah, oh yeah, and now and with this too, yeah, he's already.
Yeah, so
That's a good point.
And then about Brienne, I think again going back a couple discussions, we talked about whether that was her message about the candle in the tower, and her scene in this episode is just standing there staring at the tower. So I think if we had any percentage of doubt, that has been put to bed. Just waiting for that.
Let's talk about Ramsay and Sansa. They have some nice dialogue and banter here. But first of all, what was it that Sansa picked up there, Lady Gwyn? You did you actually did a little research on this.
Yeah, it was. He picked up an object that was sitting on top of one of the barrels there up on the wall walk, and it is either an awl or gimlet or some kind of a woodworking tool, basically, that's used to make holes in wood. Maybe we talked about that might be something that's used to open a barrel or something. Either way, a wicked weapon. So basically, a medieval version of a screwdriver or chisel or something. So we'll see what she does with that. She just sort of stashed it inside her robe.
Yeah.
The scene definitely reminded me of her when she wanted to push Joffrey off the wall walk. And I watched with an Unsullied who said the exact same thing with no prompting. Just that was really similar to the feel of it. She was built up like that. So
that's neat. I wonder whether she's going to use it as a weapon or as some sort of maybe a way to escape. Or I'd prefer to see her use it as a weapon, jam it into Ramsay's stinking face.
Yes.
But I fear that Ramsay will have to do more awful things before we see any sort of satisfaction there.
Right.
But we'll see. We'll see. Another interesting part of this scene was the talk of legitimacy, possible foreshadowing that Ramsay's legitimization will be invalid or overturned or passed over, but also maybe he dies before it matters. Yolkboy, what do you think?
Well, we did mention about the Sansa turning the Boltons on each other. That's one thing I want to mention. And, it's Sansa that brings up this bastard comment. So, perhaps the danger to Randy and Roose just comes into this, comes in with Sansa mentioning it. Perhaps there will be a chain reaction from her bringing up this issue, I'm unsure whether it would be overturned. Who knows? Given what happened in this episode, who knows? But it's definitely an interesting thought. Or it could just be Sansa starting to kind of needle Ramsay in her own subtle way.
Yeah, maybe she's just looking for ways to piss him off or to get under his skin. That's a funny phrase to use against a Bolton. He could teach her a thing or two about getting under skin, but things he does not want to learn.
Right.
And so this is the only thing we've seen so far. And we are, as readers, of course, we already know that Ramsay's bastardy is the hot button issue for him.
Mm-hmm.
And Sansa, I like that Sansa's playing on it, not just because we predicted it, because it wasn't exactly a special prediction. I think a lot of us saw that coming. I would say that was really sticking our necks out with that one. But and then yet another interesting moment in this chat, though, was the reveal about Jon Snow, that she did not know that he was Lord Commander. And I thought that was a clever way for Ramsay to phrase it. Even bastards can rise high in this world. It was good to have that line, because that's a line that pops up in the books a few times. It wasn't really expecting it to come from Ramsay.
Not from Ramsay, but nice to hear it.
But it was well placed, given the context.
Did you see the look in Sansa's eye when she was told Jon was on the wall? I don't know if it's my imagination, but she did have this kind of look in her eye of maybe sudden realization, maybe a little bit of hope, a destination, perhaps.
She was definitely surprised, like a little startled. She's been really good about keeping her, a stone face, but she did not keep. She definitely reacted there. And Ramsay, of course, being fairly clever and reasonably intelligent, noticed that reaction, knew what it meant, and then he So this made me think of something a little slightly differently. I've for the last several episodes I've been saying that Sansa's talking about how home gives her strength is an indication that she's going to kind of win from within. In other words, she's not going to necessarily flee from Winterfell because of those clues. But now the idea of her escaping to Jon, kind of like how our Jane Poole does, is maybe makes a little more sense. But on the other hand, it isn't heavily foreshadowed, and there's also the whole Brienne thing to consider, and it's a bit difficult to predict at this point. We'll just say that the possibilities remain open for multiple things to happen. Jane, if we're thinking along the lines of what happens with Jane runs into Stannis first with Theon, and so that could throw the whole thing into another. That just creates a whole other possibility of making the whole prediction more complicated. Mm-hmm. So then we have the flayed old woman. Very sad. I suppose that was maybe something we could have seen coming. Ramsay isn't going to be undone so easily, so a few casualties have to come along the way, I suppose. Now, Theon really reacted to this a bit. He looked even more miserable than he normally does. In the last, of course, the end of the last episode, he looked utterly miserable with his wonderful but horrific facial acting. And we kind of are seeing something similar here. Is this making him more like? Is this going to push him deeper into his Reek psyche, or is this making him more likely to help Sansa? What do you guys think about that? Where does this leave him right now?
I think it's going to push him deeper into Reek in the short term. I mean, there's a possibility, depending on future interactions with Sansa, at least one of which we can talk about later.
Right.
About the coming next time. But, I don't see him making big moves yet after this episode.
I think it's interesting that Sansa is there challenging. She's there saying, "You're Theon, you're not Reek."
Yeah, of
no
all
one's
the people
really
to be doing
done
that.
Yeah, it's interesting it's Sansa, but no one's done that before, and I think she is creating some cognitive dissonance in his head. And although he's kind of now been trained to think this way, I think that this challenge is vital, and this will help to develop him, rediscover himself in the long term for sure. I think it's vital. Someone said to him, "No, you're Theon. You're the heir to the Isle," she says. And Theon hasn't had any challenges. It's just been Ramsay in his mode, kind of training him. And this will be a welcome challenge to Theon to revert back to his old self, if that's ever possible.
That's a good point. And overall, this scene, as well as the scene we're going to move on to next, there is the omnipresent winter. There's a lot of snow in this scene. Ramsay's head is just coated with snow. And I considered briefly the possibility that this is not just a backdrop of weather, but it's also maybe a bit of foreshadowing for what's coming, not just for the North in general. Maybe that's what's coming for him. Maybe he's buried under the snow. If it could be a Battle of Ice reference, it could be it could just be a sign that Ramsay has really bad dandruff.
Head and shoulders at Winterfell.
No, his only heads and shoulders are the ones he cuts off of other people. So, but I think the snow is really interesting, and it's important to remember that winter is coming. That's going to be a huge plot point from going forward. It's going to be less of a backdrop and more of a centerpiece. And this is a great time for us to segue over to Stannis, Davos, and Melisandre, who are feeling the effects of the snow even more.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So let's call this, we're calling this section In the Snow. Davos, Stannis, and Mel. There's some direct, very direct, almost identical, well, maybe not almost identical, but effectively identical quotes and situations from the book happening here. Lady Gwyn, why don't you take us through some of that?
Well, we had the horses dying, so we got a couple quotes from Dance with Dragons. It's mentioned a lot in Dance with Dragons that their horses are dying. First, we got a count. We had 800 horses when we marched from Deepwood last night. The count was 64. So they're pretty depleted on their horse count. And then there's this. And there was no food beyond their failing horses, fish taken from the lakes, fewer every day, and whatever meager sustenance their foragers could find out in these cold, dead woods. But the king's knights and lords claiming the lion's share of the horse meat, little and less remained for the common men. Small wonder, then, that they had started eating their own dead. And that's, of course, Asha reflecting on the situation in Stannis' camp when cannibalism begins.
Yes. Well, I wonder if we'll get a cannibalism scene in the snow. It's not something we actually put in our notes. I just kind of thought of it here. I wonder if that's going to be part of what maybe convinces Stannis to do the unthinkable, which I think we all know what the unthinkable is. It's a topic we're about to discuss, but yeah, things that can push Stannis toward that direction. I hope we don't see that. Not because I don't want to see cannibalism. I don't want to see cannibalism.
In its place, we do.
But yeah,
at Winterfell with Frey pies, we do.
Yeah, that's the kind of cannibalism we want to see.
Not here.
Or Bolton pies.
Bolton pies.
Something like that. Yeah.
Right.
Now we got the briefest of book reader nods there with the mention that the storm crows have ridden off, which is kind of funny because it's a storm that they're all caught up in, and the storm crows are the ones who leave. But of course, the storm crows are Dario's sellsword company in the books rather than the Second Sons, which using the law of conservation of sellsword companies. They had to combine those, and so that was fun to hear them mention. 500 men. It's the exact same size company in the.
It was correct. Yes.
That's nice.
Yeah.
So, Yolkboy, Melisandre's speaking of her visions was an interesting point in this scene, and it allowed us to make some parallels.
Yeah, I'm really interested in Mel's visions in the book, so I was really glad that we got something. And she says she saw herself walking along the battlements of Winterfell, and also that she saw the Boltons' sigil lowered. So I'm starting to think, how Mel can be wrong. There might be an alternative explanation. I think that's a plot point in the books at least a couple of times with like Renly's ghost. And I wondered if the girl on the battlements that Mel thinks herself, could it be Sansa? Like we said, she could escape. It could be like the books. Could this be the snow jump that Mel's seeing and she thinks it's herself?
Something just occurred to me along those lines. If we want to possibly consider that, look for clues to make that idea more likely, because I really like the possibility that she's seeing Sansa instead of herself. We should consider looking at what kind of coats they're wearing to see if there's any similarity there.
Right.
Because if Melisandre's dressing in her usual like red stuff, that would make it harder for her to make that mistake. But if she's just wearing, like some sort of furry overcoat, kind of like Sansa has, well, yeah. In any case, I like that idea a lot.
They're both tall, so.
Yes.
I can't think of an alternative explanation for the Bolton sigil to be lowered, other than it might appear that way in heavy snow. If the sigils are kind of up a pole like flags, and then it snows, it might look like they've been lowered or something like that. But I couldn't really think of any other good ideas for that.
Interesting. Now, Lady Gwyn, you thought Melisandre's suggestion of burning Shireen may have been too much for Stannis, something that I don't think anyone wants this to happen, but it has to be considered. Well, what do you think?
It does. But watching the scene, I wonder if she's overplayed her hand. You know, this could be the reason we saw that touching father-daughter scene a few episodes ago. So she could have just gone a step too far. He was very angry. He told her to get out. It wasn't like an get out while I think about it kind of get out. Get out, you evil witch. But will Mel try to burn Shireen anyways without permission? Does that maybe Selyse gives her permission without Stannis knowing? This has been telegraphed for a long time. A lot of it has come through Mel's interactions with Selyse, so that's a definite possibility.
Yeah, Selyse's willingness has been set up for sure.
Yeah.
So gross.
It's so gross. But, you know, maybe something like that happens and that's what gets her sent back to the wall if she tries to go ahead without permission.
Now,
yeah, and that would kind of plug this gap. We were making an assumption here that Jon will need resurrecting by Mel, aren't we? But in that scenario, we need Mel up to the wall. So we are actually looking for ways that she could get sent home. So I think that's a decent call from Lady Gwyn that, you know, a kind of failed attempt to burn Shireen, Stannis kind of sends her away in disgust. I could see that.
And that would send Selyse off as well. That would be a way to kind of put things back to where they are in their book arc, getting them back to the wall.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And I also noticed something else about this scene that was unusual. Melisandre is usually a very calm and confident when she's telling Stannis what has to happen, but she even sounded a bit desperate with this. If you watch it with that in mind and notice how she's talking to him, her voice even cracked slightly at one point, and I don't think that was just a slip-up by the actress or the director. Right. No, not at all. I assume that was very intentional. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was interesting that even Melisandre maybe is feeling a bit scared, and that's something that she hasn't really shown.
Yeah. I guess at this point in the books, you're kind of getting her POV and seeing that she does have her insecurities. She's actually very, like in the show, she's very confident all the way through. In a way, she's like a strong woman kind of character, but a lot of it is just she knows how to play people. She's got a fair stack of insecurities herself. In the books, we get to hear she, you know, had a pretty horrible upbringing, and that's kind of been alluded to in the show. So I'm really glad they're showing this other dimension to her character, and it does humanize her, and maybe not make us like her more, but make us understand her. I think that's really important, that she's not just this witch. She's a human just like anyone else.
Yeah, I was actually just listening to her one chapter, just a few hours ago, just to look for her last-minute parallels or just to get a better sense of her book character. It's a good reminder. And it's true. I mean, she expresses genuine concern for Davos's feelings about how the fact he's lost all his sons, and she doesn't think like nasty, dirty thoughts at any point. She's not thinking about tricking people or hurting people. She genuinely believes, as wrong as she is about a lot of things, she really is focused on saving humanity,
right?
Which makes her a very interesting character. That chapter was probably a chapter that almost nobody expected to see, especially if you follow George's thoughts on who he likes to make point of view characters. He's been saying since the first book came out that he's never going to have point of views from characters that know too much. He's never going to have a point of view from Stannis or Littlefinger or Varys, characters that just have too many secrets in their head. So Melisandre was a huge surprise. When I heard the rumor about Melisandre being a chapter, I was like, no way. That goes against everything you said, but sure enough. And it was actually less revealing than we might have thought, but not that it wasn't revealing, it was an extremely illuminating chapter, but it didn't tell us some of the things that we might have expected to see inside her head. It was a big surprise, but in an unexpected and positive kind of way. So it's good stuff.
It really revealed more about her, like I said, about her hopes and fears. It, helped to humanize her. I thought it was a really wonderful chapter, by the way. It's one of my favorites in Dance, for sure.
Yeah, me too. So, but the mention along the more detailed look at this scene and trying to draw in some of the show plots as well, there was something that was lacking here, right?
Yeah.
When Melisandre was trying to convince Stannis.
Yes. Yeah, she's a little, like you said, she's sounding a little desperate. She's trying to convince him. She's rattling off the things that she's done for him. And she says, you know, they're dead, the usurper, Robb Stark, the usurper, Joffrey Baratheon. And then skips Balon. Nope. Forget about that leech. Never mind. So I'm sure that was lost on no one.
Yeah, even show watchers are like, wait, what about...
Wait, what about that other guy?
But that actually might be fitting in really nicely with some of our predictions. Now let's consider a few possibilities. Number one, what if Balon... We remember our prediction about Balon and the Faceless Men, where Balon isn't dead yet because he gets killed by the Faceless Men, most likely, in the books. And now that the Faceless Men have been introduced, finally we can go ahead and have Balon die.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one problem with this is how would Stannis get news of Balon's death in the snow where he is? Well, Melisandre maybe could give him that news somehow. But that would be somewhat convincing to Stannis, saying, oh, wow, so the magic is working. And what we could see is, for all we know, early in the next episode, Stannis could come back to her and say, "What, Balon Greyjoy isn't dead. You said 3, and that could be the final straw that convinces him. Say, look, Balon is dead now. Boom, there you go."
Mm-hmm.
It could also, like I said, I'm not sure how Stannis could get news of this happening. Melisandre's magic might be the only way that could happen. But watching her Sam G. Bishop, wonders if this plot line might be how the idea of Nissa Nissa is introduced to the show. I don't think Nissa Nissa has been brought up by Salador San or by anybody else. So that could be what we're looking at here, how the importance of this big sacrifice is and how it goes in line with the prophecies and all that, and that might be something that's somewhat convincing to Stannis. Although we know from Mel's point of view in the book that Stannis is not much of a believer.
Yeah.
He understands strength, but he is kind of atheistic about anything that isn't directly proven. If there's evidence, he goes with it, but he doesn't assume much about what's out there in terms of supernatural. And yeah, so I'm really hoping Stannis doesn't give permission for this. That would be a big axe in his character as far as his personality. That I really would hate to see that.
Yeah.
But it does seem, some of these things do seem to tie in with each other, or at least they have the potential to, so I guess we just have to wait.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one thing that was lacking was the possibility of other sources of King's blood. We didn't see, earlier this year, we didn't see Mance's talk about that at all, so I guess in show canon, Mance's King's blood isn't good enough. It's Wildling Kings aren't, that's not high enough grade King's
really,
blood.
Yeah.
And of course, Aemon Targaryen himself, that didn't come up. That was obviously that from a book point of view. That's why Jon sent Aemon to Old Town, is to get him away from Melisandre. That wasn't necessary here. There seems to be another reason to force force Sam and Gilly away from the Watch.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So now we had also thought about the possibility, based on the March order and a few other clues, the fact that Asha is probably going to appear later this season. We thought maybe Deepwood Mott would be included. A lot of you watchers wrote in and suggested that possibility, and we thought it was a decent idea, but it doesn't seem to be playing out that way. There's no indication that Stannis is doing anything other than heading straight for Winterfell. That point seemed to be driven home pretty well by Davos there.
Yeah, but let me just say this, because I just thought of this. We were talking about ways Stannis could get news of Balon's death. If Asha suddenly appears out of nowhere, maybe not Deepwood Mott, but just there she appears, she could be the one to bring the news that her father's dead.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Another
possibility for Davos to go do something else, or maybe to get lined up with his book arc, would be that if either of our possibilities can actually tie into this, if Stannis voluntarily burns Shireen, that could just disgust Davos to the point where he abandons Stannis. Now Davos is ultra loyal, but even Davos' loyalty might be tested by that. And this could be a way for him to leave Stannis, and I don't know why he'd want to rescue Rickon for Stannis after that. But it could be related. Another possibility is, of course, if Selyse and Melisandre are sent back to the Wall, well, I don't know if Shireen is still alive, he would not want her to be with them. Right. So he might send her somewhere else, and he might charge Davos with her protection. So, and maybe Davos and Shireen go somewhere, and during that plot arc, they encounter Rickon somehow.
Yeah.
We certainly talked about the possibility, not on this show, but in our Battle of Ice series, we talked about the possibility of a Rickon and Shireen marriage. Which, if the show is going to do that, if it's even a real thing that's going to happen in the books, that would be a pretty good way for them to set it up by just having Davos or having Shireen and Rickon just wind up in the same area together, and then it would be natural and organic for them to develop a liking for each other. And
Davos and Shireen being together is pretty well telegraphed in that scene when they were leaving.
That's also very true. That's a great point. How he was saying, I need you to protect me.
Yeah, right.
So that's a good point. So Davos and Shireen being together does seem to be something foreshadowed. So we're looking for ways for that to happen, and this could be it. I think that whatever happens, I think that the likelihood of Shireen and Melisandre and Selyse still being with Stannis when the battle really comes to a head, however that plays out, I don't think they'll be there for it.
Right. I agree.
So some way or another, they're going to have to leave, and I think we've outlined some very good possibilities. So, real quick, here, I want to drop another notification to you guys to make sure to check out A Hymn for Spring from Tower of the Hand, featuring essays by some of the most well-known community members of A Song of Ice and Fire, the podcasting and blogging community mostly. A lot of great writers have submitted essays to that book, and we're going to, in the coming months after the TV show, we're going to be discussing some of those essays. We'll probably podcast about it. So get on board the Hymn for Spring ship, folks, and start reading that so you'll be prepared for whenever that comes. I know it's hard to focus on anything other than the TV show right now. I'm the same. I've hardly focused on anything but the TV show right now. But after the show is over this season, we're going to have plenty more of things to talk about. A Song of Ice and Fire never stops. That's the great thing about it. Even when the show is over, the show must go on.
Right.
So let us move on to the Cooper and Darnell show. Of course, that means Dorne. We need some sort of cheesy 70s, 80s theme show song to denote Cooper and Darnell time that fits in so well. So Jamie and Marcella, we'll start with there. So, Darnell and Marcella. What do you guys think about the possibility that Marcella actually marries Trystane? Because, of course, it seems to be a strong enough possibility in the books for that to still happen, but it hasn't actually happened yet, so it might not happen.
Right.
Do you guys think that's what we're heading for here in the show as well?
Certainly, if Marcella has anything to say about it, and Trystane.
Yeah, right. That's certainly what they're pushing.
Probably Doran, too.
You noticed, yolkboy, you noticed a bit of a parallel here with Marcella and another unusual situation that certainly this one didn't occur to me at all.
Yeah, just reminded me of something in the earlier season. Jamie makes this massive voyage with a lot of effort and risk to come and rescue Marcella, and she just doesn't want to go. Simple as that. She doesn't want to, and we saw that happen with Yara rescuing the dog-like Reek, and he was there in his kennel, and he'd rather stay there and be a little dog. So,
and that was the last time we saw Yara. Thank you for giving her correct name, because she'll always be Asha to me.
Yeah, I have a real hard time. I call her Asha Yara sometimes.
Oh.
I thought there was a kind of a sneaky nod to Arianne here. There's actually a couple of nods to Arianne in these Dorner scenes, and this one, Jamie just sitting there waiting for Doran to come talk to him about why he's in prison and why he was even there. It's kind of a way. It's a similar kind of keeping him waiting kind of deal, and while Doran lets things play out, or while he just does his thing.
I got that too, definitely.
Other than that, I don't think there was a whole lot to get out of this scene. It was more of a, well, this is a stepping stone to some bigger things coming later. It was just a reminder of what's happening. It was basically a tease. And speaking of teases, we have the scene with Cooper and the Sand Snakes, which was a bit of there was a bit of sneakiness there. It's easy to get lost in what's happening in the scene and not realize that there's actually a point to it. Tyene was making Bronn's blood, his heart beat faster, and that was making the poison work. That's why she kept asking about how his head and arm were feeling, because she knew what was going to be going on in his body between his legs. And it's also a bit of a nod to Arianne here again, because the possibility that Tyene is seducing Bronn like Arianne seduced Aris Oakheart. We already talked in several places about how Aris Oakheart is a parallel to Bronn, loosely here. Yeah. And that brings us a little closer to that possibility. Lady Gwyn, you had some thoughts on the scene as well.
Well, of course, we discussed that, we were all very nervous. It was one of our worries, Bronn, Cooper. So this scene, just throughout the whole thing, felt like it had all the elements of a very satisfactory Game of Thrones death. You had the swan song. Jerome Flynn he finally gets to sing that song. He tried to sing it a couple episodes ago. Jamie cut him short. This is very fitting for him because he's, of course, well known as a cheesy pop singer in his native country. He gets this final tease of a sexual encounter. There's this slow-acting poison, and it just really all felt like it's building up for him to die this death in the cell. But he's still alive!
Is it reverse expectations? What's going on? Are they just setting this up bigger, or is he actually going to be safe?
I don't know. I'm really happy for it because I like Bronn. I found it a little puzzling, but I do still think he's going to die.
Yeah, maybe he's just being kept alive so Arya Hotah can kill him. I feel like Arya Hotah has to kill somebody.
Yes, right.
And who else could it be? I don't suppose he's going to kill one of the Sand Snakes.
No, probably not.
But the other possibility is that Bronn works with the Sand Snakes, or that these are both possibilities, that they work together, and that also gets him killed.
And then he gets killed, right.
Yeah. Reduced.
Too bad.
I like to think of this as reverse expectations, in a sense. Right. Like, oh, they saved Bronn, but no, they didn't really save Bronn.
Yeah. Well,
so
we'll see.
We will see, indeed. That is another kind of wait-and-see situation. It really hasn't been much of Doran Martell. I was really hoping we'd see more of him, but, of course, there's still 3 episodes left, and surely we're going to see him some. At least there's going to be a scene with him and Jamie. I think that has to happen. So, well, we'll just have to wait and see on that. Keep it coming. So let's go ahead and keep moving. Let's go on to the other deserty location. Let's go to Marine, far across the sea. We looked for some parallels in this auction scene to what was happening in the books. There's some loose parallels, mostly just Tyrion kind of manipulating his own value in a positive way to get bought, and instead of kind of the roles are reversed a bit, instead of Jorah being left behind, etc., it's that role's kind of reversed. So, Lady Gwyn, you had some thoughts on how this relates to the name of the episode.
Well, Tyrion obviously is the gift, or he proclaims himself to be the gift. I wondered when I reread the auction scene, Brown Ben Plum in Dance with Dragons is at the auction trying to buy Tyrion, most likely to make a gift to Cersei. We talked about it was probably unlikely that he was going to give him to Dany, but I just wondered if there's a little bit of a parallel going on there, since we don't have Brown Ben Plum. Or getting, the gift.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
This slaver apparently is Yezan Zokegas, who is the yellow whale in the books. Not exactly. He's not exactly 4 Illyrios, which is how Tyrion describes him. Like, damn, 4 Illyrios.
This is too bad. Yeah, surely they could have come a little closer. At least 2 Illyrios.
Even 2 show Illyrios, and Illyrio's a lot smaller in the show. But I suppose it's hard to find an actor who resembles a yellow whale.
Maybe.
So, Yolkboy, what are your thoughts on this scene? You had a couple of observations here.
Yeah, I quite like the scene, really, for what it was. So that Tyrion immediately realised how vulnerable he was alone as a dwarf and as a slave, you know, the combination of those. This is the first very brief time he's on his own in Essos, and I'm talking about when Jorah's been sold and Tyrion's waiting there on the block and he could go elsewhere. So he actually begs to be kept with Jorah, who not long ago was slapping him right in the face. But you see how important Tyrion is. It's all relative, isn't it? We're used to seeing Tyrion kind of use his wits and his sharp tongue and mouth to get out of situations like this, all the way back to Shagga in the Vale, and we also saw it with his first meeting with the slavers. He kind of lies and tells tales and just uses his mouth. But this time, he used violence, and we know he's capable of violence because of what he did with Tywin. And yeah, this time he used violence, and he whipped that guy with his chain, and you know it worked. It was the right tactic. I thought it was interesting that we see that Yezzan thinks of freeing slaves when he's reminded that slaves are being freed, and he pays them a wage, and it's like 1 coin for the rest of your life, and he gives in for that coin. And then it cuts right into Dany, remembering that in the book she's the one that started this anti-slavery thing, so it's just showing how effective it is. People will do anything to, you know, keep the old dynamics, and that includes this. In the books, it includes both the masters and the slaves. They try and reinstate old dynamics. And
now,
then,
sorry,
I was going to go straight. to the Dany Dario because
go for it.
That's good. A good point. It's literally this showing that anti-slavery isn't working. Tyrion gets paid a coin for life, and then, like in the show, Dario tells Dany that all rulers must be either butchers or meat. I think it's a very powerful line, something that could affect Dany's future arc when she has to really decide if she's going to be a kind of savior or something far more violent if she's going to save Westeros. So perhaps that's what she's learned in Marine in the books. She's either got to be a butcher or meat. It's you know, no grey area between those two. You've either got to be really firm as a ruler, or you're going to get, you know, walked on, which is what the line means. And another observation is that we have previously said that Dario embodies a few different people, and there was obviously the shave pate in there in his tone. He did actually advise Dany to kind of butcher all the masters at the wedding, or it might have been at the wedding, I think.
Yeah, it was a very similar plan that horrified Dany. And it's funny because in the books, on one hand, to me, it seems really awful, but I could almost appreciate that it was somewhat sensible, even though it was like, no, this is not like Dany at all. But I could kind of see where Dario was coming from. Like, look, just these people are never going to yield to you. They're never going to, you know, accept you. You just got to get rid of them. Which is, it's interesting how the show has actually brought that out more, because there's really no sympathetic Myronese from the upper nobility. There's certainly sympathetic lower level Myronese, but from the elites, we don't have much reason to sympathize with any of them except for some of the children, which Dany has taken on as hostages, but it's made quite clear that she could never hurt them because they're just little kids, and she likes them, and Barristan likes them too, and the idea of harming these little hostages is just, it's not going to happen. at least not with Dany's permission. And even though Skahaz is all over it, like, well, we've got these hostages, and she's like, no, we're not gonna. Sorry, that's not gonna happen. We're not gonna touch the kids. Mm-hmm. So that's something that is kind of interesting to me. That I actually have more sympathy for the Masters on the TV show, just because of Hizdar's speech and of how he points out that some of these people are not bad guys. You know, it's just. They're just caught up in their traditions, and some of them are redeemable, et cetera, et cetera. So that actually makes it more of a conundrum for her, which I think is kind of interesting. Good job, show. Now, the actual pit scene. This was a big surprise. Of course, the pit scene itself existing wasn't a surprise, but the fact that Dany was going to be there, that was we all saw it coming, that Dany was going to meet Tyrion, but we didn't. I don't think any of us thought it was going to happen this episode. That was a big surprise. So a lot of questions here. First of all, she's overwhelmed by the violence. She kind of put herself in that spot. It's very similar to what's happening in the main pit scene in the show, or in the book of Daznak's Pit, where she's just disgusted by all the killing and the flies and the heat and everything. It's just too much for her. And this is a bit of a throwback to that and how she's just disgusted. Emilia Clarke does some good facial acting there. Now, what is she going to do with Tyrion? She didn't. This is a big question for us book readers for a long time. We've expected Tyrion and Dany to encounter each other at some point, and the biggest question was, how is she going to react? Is she just going to immediately be disgusted and want Tyrion dead, want his head cut off? Would she just lose her temper? Well, it's interesting that they did it in this moment. This was really interestingly done. She was choked up by seeing Jorah. So whatever reaction she has to Tyrion being, revealed that she's got this Lannister in front of her, it's tempered by the fact that she's just been confronted by Jorah, and that just brings out so many emotions for her. So it's not a neutral reaction. It's tempered again by Jorah being there. So. We've been waiting for this reaction for so long, and how she's going to greet Tyrion, and now it's kind of thrown off. I'm not saying it's bad, but it's incomplete. We don't know yet what her reaction is going to be because it's complicated by Jorah's presence. So, do you guys have any thoughts on what might happen with Tyrion there? Do you think he's just going to talk his way into her good graces like he usually does, or do you think there's going to be anything more to it? Anyone?
I think you're right. I think that he'll use his tongue, and there'll be a moment where it looks like she's really going to turn on him. I think there'll be some tension for a while, but then, as Tyrion does in a pattern, he'll talk his way out of it, and she'll realize that she needs for a start, she needs Westerosi for her long-term goals. She needs them. And Tyrion Lannister is a very smart one, and he can help her take Westeros. Why would she not want that help?
Yeah, I think as long as her rage doesn't, take over, she should find herself with the best possible advisor she could have. I always actually thought, this is a theory I've held for a long time. We had the scene with Brown Ben Plum in the books where he's treated nicely by one of the dragons allegedly because of his drop or two of dragon blood, which Tyrion then refers to later. He even understands it, he even perceives the reason why. He said, I bet the dragons liked you, and I know why. Well, without getting into the whole is Tyrion a Targaryen theory, I'm open to the possibility of that theory. I wouldn't say I'm a major believer in it. I think there's a good chance for it, and it's certainly there's enough evidence to consider it a workable theory, not necessarily a true theory, but a workable theory, one that has to be considered possible. And this, to me, literally for more than 10 years, has been my concept of how it would happen. It would be that Tyrion is introduced to Dany, and she freaks out a bit, hates him, loses her temper, which she's certainly capable of doing, and tries to feed him to one of her dragons. Something along those lines, or the dragons are in the room, or he's put in their presence, And they like him, just along the lines of the reason they like Brown Ben Plum, and that's how we get the idea that, well, he's got a drop of dragon blood too.
Right.
And of course that, would have to mean he's Aerys' son, but
Right.
like I said, we're not going to get too deep into that. But so I'm not going to say that theory is true or not, but if that is what happens, well, if you're a disbeliever in the Tyrion Targaryen theory, I'm sorry, especially if you hate it, because I know a lot of people hate that theory, but if this is what happens, you might have to start accepting the possibility that it's true. But and frankly, it would be a bit annoying for the show to reveal that particular factor, because there's no way, I'm sorry, but there's no way it's going to be true in the show and not true in the books. That's one of those things that if it's true in the show, they didn't make that up on their own. That's because George told them that. Sorry. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but that's one of those things that the show could spoil for us. It's one of the big things I'm worried the show will spoil for us that I'd much rather read in the books.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the reality we're faced with, and this is why we're going to do a book-to-show support group episode at the end of the season to lament all the things that we're going to maybe or definitively or already have learned from the show that we just have to accept is probably a book spoiler. Some of the things the show does will not be book spoilers, but those main plot points like that, like secret identities and hidden parentage, I don't think the show's going to go too deep in making that stuff up on their own. I could be wrong, and I kind of hope I am, but I don't think so.
Yeah.
So, any more thoughts on what's coming for Tyrion and Dany? Anything else before we move on to the big location?
I just want to say that this is possibly, the most uncharted territory, isn't it, that we've had in the show, really. That watching the relationship between those two is something that some people have waited over a decade for, and the TV shows got there first, and nobody can predict because we're not there yet. It's the first thing we've hit, which is so ahead of the curve.
Yeah, like Bran was set to be really ahead of the curve, but they just suspended his plot line. So you're right. People have talked about how a lot of things are going to pass over, a lot of plot lines are going to be passed, but for the most part that hasn't really happened yet. It's just we're getting really close to that point. Mm-hmm. So season 6 is going to be where the really, really major divergences start, where the divergences based on divergences are happening. We're only seeing the beginning of that, because it's true, if you really sit down and look at all the plot lines, most of them are just getting to that point. They're just reaching their book arc. Mm-hmm. They haven't quite gotten there yet. So, all right, so let us go to our final and most important, as far as the most things happen there in this particular episode. Not necessarily the most important thing going forward, but the most focused area in this episode of The Gift, episode 7 of season 5, and that is, of course, King's Landing. It's a series of scenes mostly with pairs of people, usually involving Olenna, well, always involving either Olenna, Cersei, or the High Sparrow, or both, or rather not both, but two of those three. Mm-hmm. We get a little bit of talk about the seven-pointed star, as they banter back and forth, and it becomes clear quite quickly that Olenna this is not her ordinary opponent, is it?
No. I got the distinct feeling that she has met her match.
Yeah, I think the High Sparrow summed it up when he said Olenna is really used to sniffing out people's motives. This is a political thing and a human thing. And in a sense, although he's a religious fanatic and below the surface there's a lot up with him, he is quite pure, isn't he? He genuinely doesn't seem to have ulterior motives to be sniffed out, which is what I was pointing out. And he said he simply does the God's work, at least as he sees it. So he can't be bribed, he can't be kind of scammed or manipulated, partially due to his pure motives, but also partially due to Cersei, who has empowered him. And now he's kind of rolled on that, the armament of the faith, and he's a really great power. He's got popular support aside from everything else, which has made him a really formidable opponent.
Arguably, he is the most powerful man in the realm right now. He is certainly the most powerful man in King's Landing, I would say. Especially after Cersei goes into her cell there. So that is quite interesting. A true man of the people, uplifted by the people in a sense. And as you said, he doesn't really have weaknesses that people can intrigue towards. He may have personality weaknesses, or his rigidity may be a weakness in a sense, but as far as leaning on him, he doesn't have family to threaten, he doesn't have gold, he doesn't have greed to be, leveraged. He's terrifying in a lot of ways. Yeah. The purity, his purity is obviously, in terms of following the law, that is something that he's very strict about. If it's in the seven-pointed star, it's canon to him. It's what he's following, and yeah, it's interesting. It's something I spoke about briefly with Sean in our show only review, that he's not a good guy or a bad guy. He just follows the doctrines to the letter. When he's helping the poor, he's not doing it out of the kindness of his heart, just as he's not delighting in torturing people for their crimes. It's kind of Stannis-like in a way. It's like, well, this is the law. It's that simple.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's funny how when that attitude is applied towards laws that we agree with, it's the best thing ever. But when it's stuff like this, where he's just going after, people for their sexual choices, it's like that really offends our modern sensibilities, and is like, oh, I kind of like his integrity, but I hate what he's standing for. Yeah. So Tommen and Cersei. Speaking of butchers or meat, Tommen's scene comes immediately after Dario's line there, so we kind of get the hint there. Tommen is meat, and perhaps the High Sparrow is the butcher at this point.
Yeah.
And Cersei is kind of helping in the wrong way. So, Lady Gwyn, you notice a very interesting parallel with Tommen's youth and how that changes the scenario and creates a new parallel that wasn't there in the books.
Well, he says something. He's so frustrated about what's going on in that scene. He says, "I am the king, the queen is in prison, and there's nothing I can do." This is really reminiscent of Book Joffrey saying, "I am the king." Somebody was defying him, and he was extremely irate. And in the books, I couldn't remember if he said it in the show, but in the books, of course, Tywin says, "Any man who must say I am the king is no true king at all." So that was a little ominous, and especially, like you said, coming right after the butchers are meat.
Yeah, maybe you'd say it's Tominous. Oh,
Tominous. Yeah. Right.
It's true. Yeah, a lot of people said they were the queen this episode too. Marjorie, Cersei, and Daenerys says that, every other episode, every other scene she's in. She says what she's not, but she's I'm the queen. I'm a queen, not a. I'm a queen, not a blank. In this case, I'm not a butcher.
Funny, because Tywin, when he said, "Any man who must say I'm the king is no true king at all," followed it up with, "Aerys never learned that."
That's true. Aerys never learned that.
It's not in Dany's blood to know that lesson.
Actually, I think if I remember correctly, he said Aerys never learned that lesson, but you will.
But you will.
Well, no, sorry, Tywin, he did not learn that lesson.
No, too late.
Maybe he learned it as he was choking to death. He was like, I shouldn't have told them I was king. So, Yolkboy, you had some thoughts as well on some of the undertones in what Cersei was saying here.
Yes, Cersei, what interested me, she said that she would burn cities to the ground for Tommen, okay? And this reminds us all of, there's quite a large amount of Cersei wildfire hints in the book. Her eyes are described as wildfire. There's the bit where she's burning the Tower of the Hand. There's a fair few more Cersei wildfire connections. So we've got to remember those caches of wildfire under King's Landing that are in the books. I'm not sure they are in the show, but I thought it was interesting that she says that she would burn cities to the ground.
Yikes.
This actually, I'm going to do a brief segue here with that line because this to me is, since we touched briefly on the whole Tyrion Targaryen possibility, there's a lot of people that think that maybe Jaime and Cersei are the children of Aerys instead of Tyrion, or in addition to Tyrion. Now, The World of Ice and Fire kind of put a serious dent in that theory, almost the final nail in the coffin based on the timeline. And to me, that is a reminder that this has been alluded to. Cersei is not a dragon. She is more like wildfire. She's not Dragonflame. She's wildfire. Everything she touches is destroyed, including herself. It's uncontrollable. That kind of speaks to how Cersei's plots work. She does things, and they get out of her control, and they destroy things she didn't intend on them destroying, including herself. That's wildfire in a nutshell right there. So a true dragon has control over her dragon flame. Wildfire does what it will. So, it's maybe a bit of a loose allegory, but I like it. Now, Littlefinger and Olenna. Good to see them working together again. I'm not sure that they're going to work together in the books again, but maybe they will. The possibility is there, although Olenna is nowhere near King's Landing in the books as far as we can tell, and neither is Littlefinger. So that is a bit of a problem for them potentially working together later. But Littlefinger does give them a good reason to work together. He points out that their interests are aligned, and I think that case is well made for that. I agree that there's no looseness with that idea. I think it all fits. Olenna is smart, and she's going to realize that. Now, here's where things get confusing, though. We touched on this at the beginning of the episode. What is going on with this person that she offered, or that he offered to her? Is he talking about Lancel? That seems like the obvious answer, but it also seems to have some serious flaws. Like, why wouldn't Lancel have already talked to the High Sparrow? Why doesn't he already have the High Sparrow's ear? He's an ex-Lannister. That should give him some clout. And, of course, he has things he would say. So there's some other possibilities. Gendry is something that a few different Watchers and myself have come up with that possibility, because maybe that reveals that Cersei is not the mother of, or rather that Cersei had, the incest. This reveals the incest possibility. That certainly was a bit of a plot device in the beginning of the show and in the books, of having Gendry's black hair was a big clue. Edric Storm was going to be paraded around. That was Stannis' idea. So this idea has already been set up in the books as a possibility. I don't know where Littlefinger would have gotten a hold of Gendry, but it makes, I'm sure they could find a way to explain that. He's out there somewhere. It'd be nice to have him come back to the storyline somehow. Then again, Edric Storm is still just a dangling plot line in the book as well. So, what would that mean for Tommen if he's, we certainly had Sansa talking about that as a possible hint that Tommen's legitimization will be invalid, or his legitimization, his parentage will be discovered and outed. Yeah, it's really confusing to me as well, because if you think about, let's say Tommen does go down. Let's say it's Oliver is another possibility. Dude of Thorns, Dude of Thorns suggests that Littlefinger could be talking about Oliver. He gave Oliver to Cersei. He could also give him to, or he gave him to Cersei. He could also give him to the Tyrells, which would kind of be like giving away his best witness, or her best witness. That's Cersei's best witness. The Faith's best witness as to what Marjorie and Cersei, or Marjorie and Loras did. So it's like losing their star witness, especially if they just kill him. Or if they pull the whole Osney Kettleblack deal and torture him, or the Blue Bard deal, where they torture him into saying what they want him to say. So when he gets to the witness stand, his story is much different. One thing I fear to suggest, but seems likely, is there's a lot of torture in the book arc for this. There's witness torturing and people who have evidence getting tortured and having to tell their story certain ways, and that show hasn't done that yet. The show doesn't like to miss the opportunity to do gross stuff like that. So someone's getting tortured, and it's probably poor Oliver.
I think it's going to be Oliver. Yeah.
Which is something we touched on earlier in the previous analysis of his scenes, where he's sitting there smirking while he's telling his story. It's like, dude, you do not want to be smirking. You are not Remember, the 7-pointed star says that buggery is a sin, and you are just as guilty. I don't know what you're so.
It's a two-way street. Well,
I don't know why he thinks he's getting off.
Yeah.
Getting off scot-free there. So.
Yeah.
Now, another possibility here, another big, wide open situation here that maybe I can get your guys' thoughts on, if maybe you already have some thoughts on this. What about who is going to be in charge if Tommen goes down or if he's powerless? Let's say his bastardy is outed and he dies. It's been foreshadowed in a lot of ways. Tommen's death has been foreshadowed both through Maggie the Frog, possibly through Sansa's lines, lots of things. We don't even need to go through them. There's lots of things that foreshadow Tommen's death, other than the fact that who expects Tommen to finish the series on the throne? That's another thing that just makes you say, yep, poor Tommen.
Poor Tommen.
But who in the interim, though? Let's say Tommen is ousted fairly soon. There's no Aegon so far in the show. It doesn't look like there will be an Aegon. Who's going to be king? Who's going to sit on the Iron Throne? Right? Like, do you guys have any idea who that could be? I don't really have a thought. It might just be chaos. It might not be a king.
Myrcella? Dorne?
Well, it can't be Myrcella either if Tommen is outed as a bastard.
Well, that's true. She'd be in the same boat. No one.
You mean a faceless man?
An embassy, yeah.
Arya will be.
Send an embassy to Daenerys. I just had one idea that just came to me while you were talking about all these possibilities for the young man.
Sure.
Littlefinger. Because you mentioned, or you might have mentioned, the whole. Oh, I'm not sure if you did. Cersei and Joff's murder of Robert's bastards.
Yeah.
That was performed by a young man in Littlefinger's establishment.
Oh, yeah. Well, wait, but wasn't that actually revealed to be Joffrey who did that?
Yeah.
It was kind of ambiguous.
I think in the show it was more likely to be Joffrey. Of course, in the books we know it was Cersei. But
yes.
I think it could certainly be, this guy could testify. Just a thought. That's
a good thought. Yeah,
another way. Yeah. Get Littlefinger involved.
Well, let's move forward to the sorcery. I've combined Cersei and Marjorie into one person. Cersei, Marjorie, and sorcery. You need sorcery to do that kind of thing. And of course the High Sparrow. Cersei just keeps on smirking, and finally the smirk is wiped off a bit later this scene. So there's a couple of things in common with the show and the book here. Lady Gwyn, you had one thing you noticed at least.
Yeah, it was very similar. It maybe almost been exact dialogue. In the book, Cersei does go visit Marjorie in prison, and that scene is immediately prior to her getting imprisoned herself. And that doesn't go very well, that visit, just like on this show here. And it ends with Marjorie saying, I asked for you to leave. Will you make me call my jailers and have you dragged away, you vile, scheming, evil bitch? And I'm pretty sure those are the exact words she used in the show.
Yeah, very similar.
Chucked the venison at her. Well, I was kind of wishing it was a chamber pot, but I think it was the venison.
Ew.
So that's quite similar, but in the books there are obviously some similarities I was just going to point out. It ends up that Cersei's brought to Osney Kettleblack, who she's had sex with, and Osney says he's obviously been through hell and been tortured. That one there, she's the queen I fucked. The one sent me to kill the old High Septon. He never had no guards. I just come in when he was sleeping and pushed a pillow down across his face. So there's two major, accusations coming from Osney and in the books. And then what happens? Cersei freaks out and she kind of whirls around and tries to run. The Sparrow tries to grab Cersei, but she gets away and then gets past 4 scepters. I think she might rape one of their face. So she's really aggressive. In her head, she's thinking, "I'm a lion. You'll never catch me." It's pretty terrible. It's typical Cersei. Even though they're all after her, she's thinking that she's invincible.
She's just gonna claw her way out.
Yeah, and here in the show, it only takes this one super septa to stop her. Instead of law of conservation of septas, they had to combine them all into one.
4 into one giant one.
Yeah, and then in the books,
Yeah, she was.
Cersei in the books gets to the sept after evading all these scepters, and there's several more scepters. I don't know how many they've got, but there's also some silent sisters. You know, you don't mess with them.
No.
So they accost her, and she's taken to a cell and completely undressed. And she says, "You cannot do this." The Queen kept screaming at them. "I am a Lannister. Unhand me. My brother will kill you. Jaime will slice you open from throat to cunt. Unhand me. I am the Queen." And yeah, that's how Cersei. You see, she's got her trademark arrogance. It's
Daddy's advice.
Yeah.
I am the Queen.
Yes. Yeah. And then Unala visits her every hour in her cell from then on to get a confession, and slowly she gets worn down.
Classic sleep deprivation.
Yeah, very effective, isn't it? We've all been tortured that way in real life by ourselves in some way or another, or by our own lives. We know what sleep deprivation is like. Maybe not to this degree, but it certainly wears you down. So we talked about maybe a bit of a medium term or longer term for Tommen in terms of how we don't expect him to remain on the throne forever. And what about in the short term? This could be the way that Sir Kevin gets back in the game here now that Tommen has not much of a council, not much of a series of advisors. And from my perspective, if I were Tommen, I don't think I would want necessarily Olenna and Littlefinger as my as my main counselors, with Pycelle and Qyburn being the next tier.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound like the best group of people. I don't think they have Tommen's best interests at heart. Although Olenna might not be so bad because she still wants to maintain this Tyrell Lannister alliance, wants to rescue Marjorie. Olenna's probably his best bet, but he's probably going to want more than that. So I think this is probably how we get Sir Kevin back in, which probably won't be good for him because, as we know from the epilogue of Dance, he gets crossbowed and then little dagger. Birds with little daggers. Little birds with little daggers. And that's probably still going to happen, I guess. And so poor Sir Kevin coming back to help his nephew, and this is what's going to happen. Now, I'm sorry, his grandnephew. What do you call that?
Either, I think. Yeah.
So what it's funny is, though, just thinking about the concept of what's Tommen's, when we think about Olenna and how she's reasonably aligned with Tommen's best interest, and how Littlefinger probably not at all. Bad.
Right.
But what is Tommen's best interest? Is Cersei getting out of jail actually in Tommen's best interests? Is he better off without her?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, remember that Tywin wanted to send Cersei away.
Yeah.
He definitely thought she needed to be away from Tommen. So if you
that's a good point.
By what Tywin thought, it was to separate them.
So maybe Kevin will do the same thing, which is what Kevin brought up in the books as well. He's like, Tywin intended for you to go back to Casterly Rock, and that you weren't going to have anything to do with this. And Cersei's all confused, like, what are you talking about? I'm his mother. You can't do that. Blah blah blah. So we could be heading to see a bit of a parallel there. But I really wonder, is she the lesser of two evils for Tommen? I mean, because she's sitting there telling him how she's got his best interest at heart, how she loves him, how she would burn cities to the ground, but then she goes off and doesn't actually do anything for Marjorie. She's not actually trying to do anything for Tommen in terms of his love.
Yeah.
So yeah, can't trust Cersei even when she's your mother.
No, that's what I think.
I think she loves herself foremost. That's my opinion.
Yeah, and she loves how when she feels protective over Tommen, she feels like it's moral and good, but really it's just she's protecting herself.
Yeah.
Very cynical we could be about Cersei. We have good reasons to be. Okay, so let us move on, unless you guys have any more thoughts about King's Landing or Tommen's situation, Cersei, or the High Sparrow. Anything else to say on those topics?
All done, I think.
All right. If you want to support the show in the simplest way possible, go to historyofwesteros.com, click the donate button, and the typical amounts people tend to send us are 5, 10, 25, 50, etc. We'll be happy with anything you can do to support the show is appreciated not just by us, but by all the other watchers, because you're helping make the show better, and a better product for everybody is better for everybody. Pretty straightforward. Speaking of everybody, let us touch on our watcher questions. You guys are really on fire lately. Some of these observations are really great. We've missed a lot of these on our own, and that comes with the fact that we're trying to get all this done in a short period of time. We only have a short limited time of hours after the episode airs on HBO for us to try to figure everything out. There's just no way to get every detail, so you guys have done a wonderful job helping us pick up the slack. So keep on doing that. Keep on sending us emails, westeroshistory@gmail.com. Tweet it at us, @WesterosHistory. Go to our Facebook page. We're at History of Westeros on Facebook. Send us questions there, either by posting on our wall or by sending us a direct message. Either one is fine. A Human by Mistake wants to know, how do the Faceless Men reach up those high-up faces on the pillars? And he answers his own question. A facelift!
Ta!
Well, I'll tell you what. The quickest way to get your comment read on our show is to make a really bad pun, because I am such a sucker for bad puns. As you can tell by me putting that first out of all the comments. I picked that one to be first. So several watchers out there believe that Stannis will send Melisandre back to the wall because of Shireen. However that Shireen thing goes down one way or another, she's going back to the wall, and it will be just in time for Jon's stabbing. That could work out. That could be appropriate, because we always, us book readers, figured that Melisandre will be heavily involved in Jon's stabbing in that whole situation. But right now, it doesn't look like they're necessarily going to be near each other. But preseason trailers kind of indicated that they're going to have another scene together, so it has to happen one way or another, and this could be it. Darren Tucker, Darren Tucker the Red, the Knight of the Forums. He points out the parallel from the books. This is a pretty sneaky parallel. Bronn wouldn't fight for Tyrion against the Mountain in exchange for all this great wealth, but he's kind of being forced into something more dangerous by going with Jaime for a similar reward, actually possibly a greater reward. But it's kind of neat. Bronn was like, "Yeah, I'll fight for you, but I'm not going to die for you." But Jaime kind of forced him into it, so I like that. It's a good catch. Yeah. Now, Max Jadrewski says that along the lines of your prediction, Yolkboy, you said that maybe she's seeing Sansa. Well, maybe she's seeing herself after all, but she's a prisoner. That would be a surprise, wouldn't it? Have you guys considered the possibility of Melisandre being captured by Ramsay?
Oh. I haven't, but I like the way the watching is thinking that there's an alternate meaning. Mm-hmm. I think Mel's wrong so often. We know that, so
it's good to look for ways in which she could be wrong. Look for what the truth might be behind her mistaken visions, because that's certainly, her mistaken visions are a big part of not just in general throughout the series, but especially in the Dance with Dragons. That's really brought out. The detail comes out more in that. Okay, Mark Jacobson wants to suggest the possibility that Ghost's sudden arrival in the Sam Gilly scene was a hint that Jon was warging. This is a possibility. It certainly hasn't been touched on much in the show that Jon is a warg, but if they wanted to give us a hint, you'd think they might be doing something a little more overt than that, but it could be a subtle clue. Maybe it was just a nod to us book readers, just so we could get us thinking about it. You guys have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think more like a nod. I think if they wanted to show that in the book, they might have had to show a scene of Jon sleeping or dreaming or something to indicate to say just show watchers that there's something weird going on there. Because otherwise, I don't think you'd get it. You weren't a book reader.
Now, Victoria Jeffrey asks, now that Sansa is back in Winterfell, might the show have her learn to warg? George R. R. Martin himself has pointed out the fact that she's lost her wolf and that is an isolation point for her, that that separates her from her family. So now that she's back in her family home, her ancestral home, well, the strike against that theory, is a pretty major strike against that theory, unfortunately, is that the show just doesn't seem to have a lot of interest in developing the Stark kids as wargs, except for Bran. And even that has been done not very much. So I gotta think it's unlikely, just because they don't want to go that route, and the direwolves are expensive to make scenes with because of the CGI and all that. It's a bit of a challenge for them. So I have to say, unfortunately, that I don't think that's very likely.
Can I just say that in the books, it's entirely possible that Sansa, at some point, whether she be at Winterfell or not, develops her skills. I think George confirmed she was born a warg, so it's just making the connection. It's entirely possible that she could, for example, warg a bird.
Oh yeah, a falcon. That'd be cool. Now, so that's a good. This is a good example here, folks. The question didn't get answered the way perhaps Victoria wanted it to, but it led us down a different path, and we were able to come up with some fun things to talk about. So that's part of the value of posting questions, even if you already think you might know the answer to it. Sometimes the discussion takes a turn, and we uncover something else. That's one of the great things about A Song of Ice and Fire in general. So many things lead to other things, so many connections that we might not have made without talking them through. And that's what makes this fandom so much fun, is the never-ending possibilities. Even when they turn into dead ends sometimes, they illuminate some new path that may also be a dead end, but it's fun to talk about. Ben J. wonders if perhaps Littlefinger's decision to send Sansa to Ramsay will be what splits them apart. In other words, Sansa may partially blame Littlefinger for her torment by Ramsay. So you put me in this situation. That might be... I think that's possible. It also could just be something more like from a higher level view, where she just loses a lot of trust for people's ambitions and realizes that ambitious people are just never trustworthy, and it's time for her to rely on herself more. So it could be part of her growth, more of a realization rather than a major plot point. But I like that idea. Do you guys have any thoughts on the possibility, or whether or not Littlefinger will be blamed for this situation?
Yes.
Very straightforwardly, yes. She will be mad at him for this.
Yeah, I do think so. She's probably going to learn some self-reliance out of this.
Now, here's an interesting thought. I forget where I saw this. It may have been another Watchner question that I somehow didn't make it into my notes, but I like the idea that Littlefinger did know that Ramsay is who he is, or at least had some idea, but he pretended not to, because it allows him to swoop in and be the rescuer.
Oh, plausible deniability.
Mm-hmm. He could say, I had no idea, but I'm so sorry, but here I am, I've rescued you, everything's going to be all right, I'm your big rescuer guy. It ties into his psyche a bit, like having one of the, like not only being worthy of Sansa and her bloodline, but of her genuinely being in debt to him or feeling affection for him because he's a savior figure. Now, I think he's fooling himself if that's what he's thinking, but I like the idea. I think that's a smart thought. Okay, James Gamet Clark wonders, could the slaver/auctioneer/Mr. Echo from Lost be the equivalent of the Tattered Prince, and that he and his men are the ones who free the dragons? I'm not so sure about that. I feel like we've already seen the last of him. He did the auction, and the grayscale is already on its way, and he seems to, the Tyrion and Jorah are at the pit already. I don't know that they need to bring him back for something, although if they do, maybe it's just to show that he has grayscale or something. Mm-hmm. But it's possible. But I think, do you guys agree that I think the three of us probably agree on this, that the Sons of the Harpy are more likely to be the ones to do that? Or do you guys have some other thoughts on that? Am I wrong?
No, I think I agree with you. Yeah.
Okay. Now, let's look at another question here. Watchner, who's gotten a couple of good questions in this season, Derek Krettel, a reason not to trust Varys as a backer of Dany is his anti-magic stance. I'm not so sure I agree with that. It's possible. I like the idea, but in the books, Varys, yes, he hates sorcery. He hates blood magic. He may have hated the ritual that maybe brought the dragons back, but the actual dragons themselves, I'm not so sure about that. I think he might be a little more nuanced in his views because we already know that he was trying to, or at least Illyrio was trying to, and Illyrio knows Varys pretty well. They were trying to arrange Aegon the Sixth, whichever your beliefs on his character are, to Dany because of her dragons. That makes the Targaryen more legitimate. So I think that it's more likely that Varys is, at least if he hates the idea, he's willing to swallow it because of how good it is for them. Just from a pragmatic point of view, the dragons are just too useful to their cause, and he wouldn't want to get rid of them, I don't think. What do you guys think about that? Does that sound about right, or do you maybe think that Varys might actually have a problem with Dany?
I think you're right. I think that his hate for magic is really related to him being cut. So I don't see why he would extend that to dragons. I don't think he hates them as such.
Right on.
Yeah.
Okay, Holly Waldron suggests, I think the prospect of your wedding has given you a glow. That is a quote from Resnack Mo Resnack early on, or at a certain point in Dance. And she wonders if that's a pregnant glow, because later on in the book, Dany has that miscarriage, which is a really good catch. Now, it also begs the question, though, is this a child of Dario or Hisdar? I was open to both possibilities, and I even discussed this on an episode of a podcast of Ice and Fire with one of their show reviews in recent weeks. And this is where Holly heard me talking about this. And she was surprised I even suggested Hisdar and points out why. And it seems that there's only a couple weeks between the marriage and this pit scene, which means that there really isn't much time for Dany to have been impregnated by Hisdar, let alone to be having a pregnant glow. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that, whether or not, if you had any thoughts on that timeline or the idea that, rather the identity of this child, even though it was a miscarriage, it's not necessarily important, but whether you think it's more likely that it was Dario or Hisdar or anything like that.
I think it's pretty definitely Dario. I think the pregnant glow, or the glow comment, was before she was wedded to Hisdar, right?
Oh, it's before she was wedded. Yeah, it's the quote is, in fact, I think the prospect of your wedding has given
right. So the prospect. So if she had a pregnant glow, I think there's it has
to be Dario.
Match, but I would say that, and I thought so anyways, because the whole Dario thing, like, Hisdar seems a little tepid.
Yeah.
Not sure he had much time for her those weeks.
Now, is there a chance Harry the Heir will mistreat Sansa? That her arc is not nearly as different as it seems from the books. Lady Gwyn, you had a thought on that.
Well, I did wonder the same, because, in the Elaine sample chapter, Harry is kind of presented as a jerk. I mean, he's not a Ramsay-level jerk. Let me be perfectly clear. Not.
Yeah, no, we don't want to get any spoilers with that chapter, but it's fair enough to say that without being spoilery.
Right. So let's just. And the reason I bring that up is because George's response to the scene in the last episode was to direct people at that chapter.
Yes.
So that could have been he wants to illustrate how different the arcs are. But I did wonder if he was kind of saying, read between the lines, so read that chapter and, make up your own mind. So that's what I would suggest as well.
Okay. We had some other questions, but we're running short on time, so we're going to move on. Some of these questions will get answered next time instead. Let's really quickly do our worries. Well, we talked about Bronn already. We think we still have worry for him, even though he's in the clear in the short term. Mm-hmm. What are some other worries you guys have? Who are you most worried about?
Well, I think we're all worried about Shireen.
Yes.
you know, all the people who are currently imprisoned in King's Landing.
By the Faith, yeah.
By the
Loras and
Faith.
Marjorie.
We're worried on different levels for them.
Are we worried for Stannis?
Yeah, I'd say that Stannis can have a legitimate worry. I think we said on the show before, a lot of people take for granted that in the books he's going to take Winterfell. I think that the battle on the ice, he'll have no problem. But remember, his men are eating each other. I think there is more doubt than people think, just because of the elements, for one thing. And I think that in the show, who knows? I wouldn't want to second guess George, and I certainly wouldn't want to second guess D&D. The snow's coming. There was snow on the tents. It was shown. Who knows if Stannis is going to either have to retreat or get stuck with Ramsay having the kind of upper hand again, just because his soldiers are fresh. The Stormcrow's leaving. The numbers are getting reduced. You know, it could be a kind of downward spiral starting for Stannis, but who knows? I wouldn't say I'm worried about Stannis. He can take care of himself, but I think that there is a chance in show canon that he could be headed for big trouble.
One character I think we're a little less worried about in the short term is Brienne, and that partly comes from something we're going to talk about after the credits, but also just because there seems to be more emphasis on the possibility that Sansa will escape. For me, that's the main thing. And if she stays within Winterfell, I worry more for Brienne, interestingly enough. If she escapes, it seems like Brienne has to be part of that.
Yeah, she's got a role. Then Brienne's arc this season has got a purpose, but it doesn't make sense if Brienne is just waiting endlessly. Something has to happen with Brienne.
I agree. It's interesting too that we look to that specific thing. The fact that she has a purpose on the show makes her a lot safer. And at the beginning of the season, that is what we worried about. We were wondering what her purpose is going forward. Now that the Riverlands arc is cut and all these other things, if she has no point, then that puts her at risk. But she seems to be, things are progressing, even though she hasn't been on screen much at all. It seems to be progressing towards her having more of a purpose, which is interesting. So I like that. That's a good thought. Now, normally we would do our outro and credits here, and we read our Patreon supporters off, but we are short on time, and I know that they don't mind the occasional skip so we can get more content in. So thanks to our Patreon supporters. We'll thank all our Patreon supporters, since we're not going to go through people by name. To support History of Westeros through Patreon, simply go to www.patreon.com/historyofwesteros. Check out the benefits and all the ways it works and all the different support levels. And if it's the right fit for you, we would thank and welcome your support. Now, since some of you will be tuning out to avoid the trailer discussion, this is where we thank our lovely guests from Radio Westeros. Thanks, Lady Gwyn and Yolkboy. Tell us a bit about how to find you guys and what you've been up to lately.
Okay. Yeah, come and check out Radio Westeros. The best way is at radiowesteros.com. We do podcasts. We'd really love it if some of you would come and try us out. So please consider it. radiowesteros.com.
Right on. I think I'm one of your biggest fans, so I can always say good things about Radio Westeros and mean it. It's always better to be able to recommend things that you actually like yourself. That's what we try to do here in general. Mm-hmm. All right. So, folks, if you don't want to be spoiled on the trailer discussion, now is your time to drop off, and we will see you next week. But if you are in for the rest, let's get into it. We have Dany facing down Jorah and Tyrion. This is kind of going along the lines of what we thought. We see Tyrion kind of looking back as it looks like Jorah is being led away, and she has this line, why should anyone follow a queen who can't keep her promises? So, I don't know, it looks kind of bad for Jorah, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Now, if he's locked up, you wonder how that's going to play into his grayscale if he's just kind of in a dungeon. Maybe like it develops while he's down there, or it spreads to his jailers, or I don't know. Maybe
could start the plague and the
yeah. That could be locking him up with other people. Might be how it spreads. So that could be the purpose there.
Right.
But no danger. It doesn't look like anything bad's going to happen to Tyrion. I don't see any of my dragon-related theories. There's no hint of that coming true yet, but we'll see. Sansa and Reek together. Sansa's pretty pissed, understandably. She says, if I could do what Ramsay did to you, I would. Now, watching her, Billy Davis III noticed a mild parallel here. Earlier on in Sansa and Reek's first interaction was Reek saying, "He'll punish me," because she's not holding his arm. And she says, "Do you think I care what he does to you?" Well, now she really, really, really doesn't care what he does to you, Reek. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's, she's going the sort of anger, the path of anger, I think, based on that little, so.
We also have Cersei in prison, looking kind of haggard like Marjorie, but remaining defiant. She's not ready to submit yet. She eventually kind of becomes more submissive in her book arc, but they might just be, that's not a very exciting thing to show in a trailer. So I suppose we're just seeing that, looking forward to seeing how they, it's funny, I'm looking forward to seeing how Cersei gets treated in prison by these awful faith people, but I don't mean it like that, although I sort of do.
Yeah.
We also have Jon arriving at Hardhome with Sam giving a voiceover. He's saying, "Jon's taking a risk. We don't stand a chance otherwise." And it actually looks like Ollie might be getting a little convinced. The look on his face is, Ollie's facial expressions have been so, like, important and major. They've been like a big focal point of some of these trailers. Just quick shot Ollie and it tells you everything. Yeah. So I was actually a little surprised by how, like, he looked like he was taking Sam seriously. Of course, it could be a little editing trick, but. And on the other hand, the Wildlings are not thrilled about working with Jon. It looks like Jon is going to face some opposition up there. Do you guys have any thoughts on what's any potential for that, or is that just a wait-and-see situation?
Yeah, I thought it looked just like a scary and very difficult situation, basically.
Yeah, just tense. We'll see. Maybe Jon will regret not having Ghost with him after all, huh?
Maybe.
So now we also have some casting news from Season 6. This is what we'll close out the episode with. We've only got a few minutes to talk about it, but it's pretty exciting. Now, all this news comes from Watchers on the Wall, who are the absolute best for casting news, among other things, but particularly stuff about sets and casting news and casting calls and all that. So follow them on Twitter and on their website for more updates. Now that Season 6 casting is underway, they'll probably be having more stuff leaking out over the next several weeks and all the way up until next season. Well, what we wanted to do was consider who we're not seeing through this list, but we don't have time for that, so we'll just talk about who is on this list. First of all, the big one, they're casting a pirate in his 40s to 50s. He is, quote, an infamous pirate who has terrorized seas all around the world. He is cunning, ruthless, and has a touch of madness. He's a very dangerous-looking man. Obviously, that's Euron Greyjoy.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
We get Euron.
Yeah, Euron, but I would say that perhaps they could combine some of Victarion into Euron.
That's right.
Yeah.
Folks watching on YouTube, notice I have my Victorian Greyjoy shirt on here, and that I'm wearing that in honor of the fact that he was not cast, but of course I saw that coming. I wouldn't expect him to have been cast. It seemed like Euron is a far more compelling TV character, but I hope you're right, Yolkboy. I hope that there is some Victarion in Euron. Maybe he's as good a fighter as Victarion. Maybe he's a big badass.
Yeah, and he could even show up in Marine to deliver a fleet.
Yes, that's true. Okay, Lady Gwyn, take us through the next exciting casting announcement.
The next one is a father, aged 50s to 60s, is one of the greatest soldiers in Westeros, a humorless martinet, severe and intimidating. He demands martial discipline in the field and in his home. Described as a very good part for next year and centrally involved in one of the protagonists' storyline.
Okay, that's got to be Randall.
Randall Tarly.
Got to be Randall Tarly, and there was a little foreshadowing of him already this season with Stannis and Sam talking about him.
Right.
So that's cool. Now, Yolkboy, there's possibly some more in that same.
Yeah, mother in her 50s. She's sweet, plump, adoring mother, and has a soft spot for one of her children who benefits from her decency. And nobody seemed to know who this was, but I think it's Sam's mother. What do you think?
I think you're probably right. I hadn't really thought about it, but once you suggested it, I haven't been able to think of any other possibilities, to be honest.
Definitely, especially that last bit, because we know in the books that Sam is intending to send Gilly and the baby to his mother. So.
Which means that instead of Old Town, we might just get Heart's Home. I'm sorry, not Heart's Home, but Horn Hill. So it might just go straight there. In the books, Gilly talks about you know, how Sam talks about how his mother would be pleased to have a blood of Sam's there, and how Randall would actually be a little pleased, even though he wouldn't admit it. We also have a note of a priest who's in his mid-40s or 50s, a gruff ex-soldier who found religion, now a no-nonsense rural priest who ministers to the poor of the countryside. He's a salt of the earth man who has weathered many battles. This sounds like a combination of Septon Maribald and the elder brother, which means that Sandor might still be alive on the TV show, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
That's exciting.
Yes.
That is very exciting. So, folks, a lot to be excited about for next season. That's really good news. We look forward to the rest of this season as well. It should be the most exciting part of the season. There's always a lot of action and big climactic moments in episodes 8, 9, and 10. So we hope you'll join us next week as we get through this exciting finish to the season. Sorry to be rushing out of this episode, but it's time to go. Valar Morghulis, folks. We'll see you next time.